When people think of Oscar Peterson, they usually picture something like this. You know, the musical equivalent of this. But there's another, less well-known side to his playing that I absolutely love. Oscar Peterson, the minimalist. And today I want to take a look at 16 bars from a solo that exemplifies this more subtle flavor of Peterson's piano mastery. Let's see what we can learn from this. So the song is called Sometimes I'm Happy from the 1984 album A Tribute to My Friends by the Oscar Peterson Quartet. I'll play the first 16 bars of the recording and then we'll talk about what he's doing. That is just so badass. Now, playing fast, playing a lot of notes is difficult, it requires a lot of skill. But making your point with very few well-chosen notes also requires a lot of skill. And this solo is such a great example of that. The first 8 bars are a masterclass in both leaving space and melodic development. Here's the chord progression. We're in the key of A flat, and the first 8 bars consist of a series of 1-6-2-5 progressions. Now let's look at how he develops his melody in this first part of the solo. He begins with a simple 2-note motif, a pickup that ends on beat 1 of his first solo chorus. The notes are A flat, the root of the key, and the F that's a third below. He then leaves a long pause during which he drops some subtle left-hand voicings. More on this later. After 2 bars, he plays an expanded version of his opening motif. It has both greater range and longer duration. Where the first phrase started on the end of 3, the second one starts a bit earlier on the end of 2. And where the first phrase contained the root and the third below, the second one adds the third above the root as well. After a similar pause, he does the same thing. He expands further on the original idea by making it longer and wider yet again. He starts on the end of 1 and expands the range of the phrase to an octave. Notice also that while the first 2 lines ended with a note on beat 1 of the bar, this third one delays that resolution by 2 beats, further adding to the drama. That drama then comes to a temporary conclusion with the fourth phrase, where he shortens the duration again and transposes the resolution down an octave. So again, the initial idea, short duration, narrow range. First variation, slightly longer duration, wider range. Second variation, much longer duration, much wider range. Third variation, a little shorter again and still wide range, but lower in register and ending on a low tonic note. So it feels like a natural conclusion to the 8-bar phrase. This is a fantastic example of melodic development. What makes it all the more impressive is the fact that he improvised the whole thing, right? He didn't sit there going, I think I shall play a short motif and then develop it. No, of course not. This is just a spontaneous expression of a creative genius that has been honed through a lot of hard work and dedication. Everything he plays organically flows out of what he played before. One more question worth asking is, what notes does he use as raw material for his melodies? Well, let's see. Lots of A flats, lots of Fs, we got E flat, C flat, and B flat. There's different ways to look at that. Here's how I think of it. An F blues scale. If any of you have seen my previous video about the Rhodes solo in Don't Let Me Down, there I talk a lot about the blues scale starting on the 6th degree or sub-mediant of the key. This right here is the exact same thing. And again, there's other ways to frame it, this one just makes the most sense to me. Meanwhile, back in the left hand, he marks the 2 non-diatonic chords, F7 and B flat 7, every time they happen, with super simple tritone voicings that he drops precisely in between the right hand phrases. and so on. In bars 4 and 8 he also plays an E flat 7 tritone voicing. And the first time he marks the tonic chord in his left hand is at the beginning of the second 8-bar phrase, also with a tritone. And speaking of, let's find out what he does with the second 8 bars of his solo. Here's the chord progression. 2 bars of A flat 7, a bar of D flat 6 and a bar of G flat 7. And then there's another turnaround progression like in the beginning of the form, except it's a whole bar per chord instead of 2 beats. And they replace the tonic A flat chord with a 3 dominant chord, C7, a very common substitution. So what does he play over this? After another little pickup starting at the end of the first 8-bar phrase, he takes the idea of surrounding the tonic with a third above and below, the one he used in bar 2 of the solo, and turns it into a longer 2-bar phrase. He then takes 3 of the notes he just used and plays them over the D flat 6 chord, B flat, A flat and F, which are 3 of the 4 chord tones of D flat 6. Next we get to the G flat 7 chord. The line he plays there is so common in jazz that it has a name, the Cry Me a River lick, named after an old jazz standard called Cry Me a River. The melody of that tune starts like this. And Oscar plays the following variation of that lick over the G flat 7 chord. The last 4 bars of this 16-bar section are another fantastic example of melodic development. Check this out. He starts with a little triad motif on the C7 chord that spans from the root to the 5th. Then in the next bar, on the F7 chord, he plays a busier melody that also spans from the root to the 5th of, in this case, an F triad, except he fills in the passing tones between the triad notes, and most importantly, he adds an extra note at the bottom, below the root, so the line now actually encompasses 6 notes instead of 5. And we can see where this is going. In the next bar on the B flat 7 chord, he applies the same idea to a B flat chord, but adds another note, this time at the top above the 5th. So the line now encompasses 7 notes. So just like in the first 8 bars, he creates excitement in his solo by taking a musical element, in this case the range of a little motif, and then expanding that element, going from a 5-note range to a 6-note range, to a 7-note range. Notice also that with each new variation he's higher up on the piano. That also adds to the build of the solo. In the last bar of the second 8-bar section, there's an E flat 7 chord which sets up the return to the tonic chord A flat. What he plays here is straight out of the blues playbook. A blues lick that anticipates the tonic chord, even though technically we're still on the 5 chord. This is super common in blues, and Peterson, whose playing is very blues influenced, does this all the time. Notice that the lick contains notes from the F blues scale, and it stretches from F at the top to F at the bottom. As I've shared a bunch of times now, I really like thinking of the sub-median blues scale, in this case the F blues scale, as a great option for bluesy soloing. Some people push back on this and argue that it's better to always think of a scale that starts on the tonic. In this case that would be A flat. And hey, that's fair. If that is easier for you, God bless. The way I conceptualize it is not the right way, it's just one way that happens to work really well for me. So before we wrap this up, let's take a quick look at the left hand in the second 8 bars. After marking the tonic chord with another tritone voicing at the beginning of bar 1 of this section, he goes from 2-note voicings to 3-note voicings. Another subtle way in which he slowly starts building his solo. By the way, one of the hallmarks of Peterson's playing is his tendency to play the tonic chord as a dominant 7th chord, even when the song is not a blues tune and the sheet music says major 6 or major 7th. Now that's not an uncommon thing to do in general, but he does this a lot. Next, check out this little move here. He plays this chordal voicing that would fit an E flat minor 7 chord or an A flat sus chord, and then goes back to A flat 13. essentially implying a 2-5 progression, a common technique for the tonic chord in a bluesy environment. The next voicing he drops is this G-flat 13, and then we get to the turnaround. Two things to notice here. The rhythm in the first 3 bars is the same. He plays the chord of each respective bar on the end of 3 and then anticipates the following chord in the end of 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1. And secondly, here's an issue that we often run into with jazz voicings. If we're dealing with cycle progressions, as we very often do in jazz, and we keep voice leading from chord to chord, the voicings tend to get lower and lower until they hit what's called low interval limits, which is a fancy way of saying they start sounding too dark and muddy. One great way of dealing with this is to switch from an A voicing to a B voicing for the same chord, or vice versa, to get us back up to the middle of our chord range. And that's what he does here on the B-flat 7 chord. He plays an A voicing first, and then switches to a higher B voicing before moving on to the next chord, E-flat 7. And there you have it, Oscar Peterson using restraint. Who would have known? Like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love.